please remind me to stop recording once I start the quiz so that Finn and Damon don't get to see all the answers again.
Oh, you know they tell you.
They do. They tell me. Damon's like, Mrs. Morris, we just saw all the answers. Yes. No. All right, people. We're ready to begin. Reminder that Friday is our test. Thursday, let me just ask this. Thursday is our test review, and we are doing that in small groups. Is everyone okay with a small group if everyone wears their mask in the small group? I'm asking as a group, but some of you might feel different. If you feel different, email me and we'll figure something out, okay? So if you feel uncomfortable working in a group with everyone with their mask, everyone will have to wear their mask. Email me and we can figure something out. We can either use the room next door to kind of isolate you if you feel that you need to. So just email me and let me know that, all right? So we're on page 9. So far in this slow, and please make sure that I hope you see that this march toward revolution is a slow, methodical process. I think it's contrary to, I think, what maybe you've been taught in other classes, that colonists get mad about taxes and then we go to war. It's a very slow, methodical process. The Boston Tea Party is 1773. I don't know if any of you have ever noticed my sticker, this sticker up here. When you leave, you can look at it. It's the round one with the 2 little tomahawk, 1773. That's the Boston Tea Party. So again, that's a full 3 years before we get to anything that's going to resemble war. And even after that, even after those of you that might know Lexington and Concord, where we actually fire shots, we still are trying to come about a way to peacefully or successfully resolve our argument with the crown. We also should make sure that, as I'm saying, our argument with the crown, our argument is really with Parliament, not the king. We recognize the king as our sovereign. We have no issue with the king. We understand that all these issues come from Parliament. And that will be, again, the part that we address towards the back end. So on page 9, we've got the next set of issues that call us to crisis, and that's the Tea Act. The Tea Act is going to grant the British East India Company a monopoly in American tea trade, and that's the problem. It is important to note that the cost of tea actually goes down, so it's not necessarily the tax that's the problem. The problem is the monopoly. The problem is that the British East India Company is on the verge of bankruptcy. They're about to collapse, and Parliament creates a favorable act and a tax in Parliament to protect the British East India Company. And to the colonists, that's seen as corrupt. That's seen as Parliament intermingling its job as legislators with people's private business. So I am doing something in Parliament to protect my company, not to protect the best interest of my people. So please make certain that you understand that the price of tea goes down. That's not what they're mad about. They're not mad about the idea of how much tea is going to cost. It's the fact that people in Parliament are now protecting their private interest by creating monopolies where people are forced to buy their product. Does that make sense? That's very corrupt, and probably not the way you were taught about the tea tax, that they taxed our cup of tea, but that's not the issue. The issue, again, is Parliament protecting themselves and doing it at the expense of the colonists. They certainly would not have been allowed to do that in Britain. England would have had a major upheaval if there was a monopoly on tea in England, but because they're the colonies, they feel like they can get away with that. Americans reacted very angrily, saw the tea tax as an attempt to trick the colonies into accepting a tax through cheaper tea. And that is the problem, which results in this thing called the Boston Tea Party in December 1773. Sons of Liberty dressed as Indians. And again, the disguise of Indians shouldn't be lost on you. The idea, again, of using a group of people that are hostile to camouflage who they really are. And for a long time that held out, that they did this in secret because of what they do. They smash 342 chests of tea into the Boston Harbor, which is thousands and thousands of dollars of capital. And again, that's why they had to keep their identity secret, because what they did was a major crime, an economic crime, a terrorist crime, and they're going to dump all this tea into the harbor. As a result of that, we get the Intolerable Acts in 1774. And the Intolerable Acts are to punish Boston. And again, this is where we have to think about, how do we get to Revolutionary War? How do we get to all these people wanting to fight? Because at this point, most everything is focused in and around Boston. And what happens as a result of the Intolerable Act is the Boston, and the Intolerable Act is a whole bunch of acts. You should see that S. The first one is Boston Port Act, which the harbor is closed. Parliament closed that harbor. No ships going in, no ships going out. So for those of you looking at how to convince that 1/3 to stay on the side of the Crown and the Tories, this is definitely one of those things that you could discuss. The idea that the port harbor is closed down and no one's going to make any money. No one's making any money. And they will remain closed until damages were paid and law and order restored. Massachusetts charter was revoked. It forbade town hall meetings. Enforcing officials who killed colonists would now be tried in England. And then the last one, most importantly, is the Quartering Act, provided for the quartering of troops once again in Boston. And quartering means if they knock on your door, you have to house them and feed them, most often without any reimbursement whatsoever. The one on the bottom of page 9 is at the same time as the Intolerable Acts, but not intended to punish. This just happened by circumstance to coincide. And this one, had it not happened at the same time as the Intolerable Acts, probably would have still roused colonists because it makes them incredibly angry, but might not have had the same impact. In French, the French in Canada were guaranteed the right to practice Catholicism. That's all it is. Simple. If you were French and you were in Canada, you could practice Catholicism. The French were allowed to keep their old customs. At the bottom of the page, colonial reaction was complete, total outrage. They were furious, viewed the act as an insidious attempt to create a new French Canadian and an American Indian threat in the Ohio Valley region. What the colonists thought was, are you kidding? We just fought to get rid of this French influence, and now you're going to let them practice their own religion and practice their old customs. And especially anti-Catholic. It is huge. People's response to this Quebec Act is extreme. And we get this extreme backlash of anti-Catholics and allows the colonists who might not have been upset about the Intolerable Acts to group all of these things together, even though they weren't supposed to be together. And this certainly is a plus for those people wanting to incite some kind of reaction by the colonists negatively toward Parliament and the Crown. So at the top of page 10, we have the First Continental Congress, which should tell you there's going to be a Second Continental Congress. You have to keep them both separate and what they both did at each time. First Continental Congress is going to occur in 1774, before the American Revolution. It is in response to the Intolerable Acts, and the committees of correspondence urged the colonists to act quickly. Again, this response is the legislative side. Let's get people to represent us. Let's all get together and let's discuss how we're going to do that. So in the fall of 1774, First Continental Congress deliberated all of these actions. It is important to note at this point, 12 of the 13 colonists, the only one that's not there is Georgia, because they're doing their own thing too far away. That finally North Carolina and Rhode Island have jumped into this. They see now that there's reason to participate. Sam Adams, John Adams, George Washington, Patrick Henry, and the first thing they're going to do is endorse several resolutions. And again, this is the legislative. This is the result of salutary neglect, that these colonists know that they need to proceed with things in a fashion that resembles some kind of government procedure. And these resolves begin with Suffolk, and Suffolk is in Virginia, and it shouldn't be lost on you how many of these things have names that attach itself with Virginia. Denounce the Intolerable Acts, urge colonists, and this is, again, D, you should be able to recite all of these. It's one of the times I'm going to tell you you need to memorize something in this class. Urge colonists to organize a militia. So this is the first thing. We need to organize militias. Called on Congress or colonies to suspend trade. We are now no longer trading with you. No trade. Not just a boycott of buying your stuff, but we're not giving you our stuff. And then the last one, don't pay your taxes. Do not pay your taxes. We're going to skip that Galloway plan. You can read that. Main purpose is to petition for the redresses of grievances, and this is called the Declaration of Resolves. So let's look at these words. Petition means to write stuff down. You're going to write a petition. We, the aforesaid, hate the fact that we have the following dress code violations, and then everybody signs it and sends it up to Dr. Jenkins. Don't do that. It's not the way to do that. Grievances. Grievances are the things that you don't like. And you're going to list all these things you don't like. Colonists gave colonists the legal right to assemble in order to seek redress. And redress means an answer to what we're doing. Bill of Rights established the structure for the Declaration of Independence. And we're not writing the Declaration of Independence yet. Note the date. We're in 1774. And then, most important, and it tells you the most significant action of Congress is the association. Called for a complete boycott of British goods. In my head, the association is a band from the 60s that sang like doo-wop. I always sing this in my head like that. So called for a complete boycott of British goods, non-importation, non-exportation, and non-consumption. We are not importing goods, we are not exporting goods, and we are not using anything. Anybody see a problem with that? That's got to be a big problem. Do we make stuff in the colonies? No. Can we sell to other people? No. So we've got to figure out pretty quickly, if we're going to abide by this boycott, we have to change some things fairly quickly. Please look at H. It's really important. Congress restated allegiance to the king. So here's what they're saying. King, we are loyal to you. We just hate the people that are making the laws. We have nothing against you, King. We really, really hate Parliament. No real desire to be independent. We just want someone to listen to our problems. And then here's the problem. And we discussed this earlier. If Parliament responds to the First Continental Congress it has to recognize its right to exist. And if it recognizes its right to exist, then they have to listen and address them. And so what Congress and the king have to do is ignore it. That's their only redress, is to ignore it. To recognize it gives it a legitimate right to exist. And for the king and parliament, it has no legitimate right to exist. None at all. None at all. A comparison would be if Sullivan County decided to form their own state and said, we now want to be a state, and we had a Congress and we wrote out laws and we sent it to the United States Senate. If they recognized the right for us to submit, then they would recognize our right as an entity, and you can't do that. So it would be tabled and disallowed. If you ever attend any formal meetings of anything, you'll hear that term a lot. Let's just table this, meaning we're not dealing with it and we're going to table it and leave it aside. We're not going to recognize any of the issues that go along with that. And that's kind of what they did. So, the bottom of page 10, while the First Continental Congress is going, while all the colonists have been told to generate and gather militias, we also have the Crown and Parliament pushing back. Because again, at this point, many of these people have committed treason. Many of them have committed criminal acts, specifically Sam Adams and all of the people that participated in the Boston Tea Party. So Parliament ordered General Gage to arrest the leaders of the rebellion, underline, 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 rebellion, right? This is a rebellion. And prepare for military action. And Gage said, well, here's one easy, quick way to do that. We will disarm the militia. We will take away their weapons. Weapons are typically stored in what's called an armory. And armories are places. We currently have an armory that's outside Terre Haute South High School. Whether they actually have weapons stored in there, I don't know, but they certainly have military equipment stored, and so that makes it an armory. So General Gage said, I'm going to go for two things here. I'm going to go to Lexington and Concord to take away their ability to create war. I'm going to take their weapons and their munitions, and then while I'm there, I'm going to get these two people, Sam Adams and John Hancock. Sam Adams is the leader of all of this illegal criminal activity, and John Hancock is financing all of this. John Hancock has lots of money. He's financing it. So April 1775, 700 British redcoats sent secretly to nearby Lexington and Concord. So let's pause there. You're moving 700 men. Do you think they did that in secret, wearing bright red coats? Absolutely not. They think they're moving in secret, but the militia and Minutemen have already set up a system of warning. So when these troops start to get ready for their early morning march that they hope is a secret, this goes out. It reminds me, just because I like to have these little cues, of Lady and the Tramp movie. Remember their little dog? That's what this is. It is a quick movement of information when these troops start moving. So it's not a secret. They already know, and the militia is already starting to prepare. And they're going to Lexington and Concord to seize gunpowder and arrest Sam Adams, John Hancock. Paul Revere, William Dawes warned the militia. I always put Paul Revere there just because, but really it was William Dawes. Paul Revere gets captured. He doesn't really participate much. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow makes Paul Revere a hero, of which he's not ever a hero. He is not a person that participates very proudly and loyally in the American Revolution. He kind of is a pirateer and makes money off of things. But anyway, he's there just because you know his name. Just saying, like when you go to Boston and you go to little shops, anytime you want to buy something with Paul Revere, they're like, oh, you really want to buy something about him? Because he's not the greatest. That wasn't me saying it. It was people working there. But I'm saying, yeah, don't be buying any Paul Revere stuff. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow makes him very popular with that work of poetry, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. And I think it's just because it's easier to rhyme than William Dawes. So we get to the Battle of Lexington and Concord, when Minutemen refused to dispense on the Lexington Green. Has anybody ever been there? Anybody been to Lexington and Concord? Okay. If you ever get to Boston, I highly recommend it. First and foremost, it's this big, long walk that I actually walked. So it is important that I walked about 13 miles. It's important when Mrs. Norris walks 13 miles. I don't do those things willingly. The green is the Commons, and what we have is a standoff. We have a standoff between the British Army and the Lexington and Concord militia, and they're standing in this open green, and as what always happens in heightened tension, somebody's finger slips, shoots, and we have this thing called the shot heard around the world. No one knows who's fired first. Historians have spun their wheels looking to see if they could figure it out. They have all kinds of auditory equipment, sensitive sound systems trying to figure it out. We've never figured it out. We don't know who shot first. But what we know is shots are fired. And then at this point, what becomes an important event towards this beginning of revolution is the British are pushed back all the way to Boston down this path of Lexington and Concord. So it's really a path. It's a hedge. Usually there's a wall, probably about at some point shoulder high, but for the most part hip high walls built of stones along this path all the way back to Boston. And what the Minutemen do that they have learned as fighting Indians is they hide behind these hedgerows while the British retreat down the path in their bright red coats, shoulder to shoulder, marching down. And they will successfully push them all the way back to Boston. There will be about 8 Americans killed, wounded, and about 270 British soldiers dead. The interesting thing, because we went to Boston, I think in June, earliest June, there are, commemorative little spots all along this path. Many of them are very simple stone, big giant stones, but they're kept and managed by Great Britain. And there are wreaths and flags, British flags, at all of these stops. And when we went, very, very fresh flowers, like real fresh flowers that had just been put there, obviously by someone, I don't know if they were from the UK, but obviously someone supportive, which was very interesting to me that was still upkept by the British, because these flowers are really fresh. Flags were brand new, little flags. Names on these places at different parts. So by day's end, 273 casualties, 95 of which are American. And this is the important part, E. Minutemen encamped outside the city and lay siege to Boston. So now these people have come in. British have been pushed back, and Boston is surrounded by Minutemen. It is, again, an important day for colonists that they were able to come up against the might of the British Army, 700 of them, push them back. So at the bottom of page 11 and 12, and please let me reinforce how important the next 4 chapters are. These 2 chapters and our next 2 chapters. There, to my knowledge, barring last year's, but I actually think there was, I think Courtney got I think Courtney Luking, I think a couple of my kids had a question about the American Revolution. There is something about the American Revolution that you have to write on every single test that I have ever seen since I started teaching APUSH, whether it's a short answer question, whether it's the actual DBQ itself, or whether there's a long essay. This is a really important topic, and it's not ever will be topics that are easy for you to do. I think one of the hardest ones that my kids had was a change in British identity, and we'll look at that one. I think it's one of the ones that we work on. So this is really an important topic. And one of the things that's important is this transition from 1773 to 1776. How does this occur? And also these ideas of strengths and weaknesses. On the bottom of page 11, British strengths and weaknesses during the American Revolution. British strengths are overwhelming. Population favored Britain. Superior monetary advantage. That is going to be one of our biggest difficulties is money. It's going to bankrupt France. We're going to bankrupt France. We borrow so much money from France, they go bankrupt. And then they kind of have their own little revolution. But it's important to note that. We borrow money from private citizens. Imagine at this point if the government had to go to private citizens and say, hey, can we borrow some money? It is unheard of, but necessary in this time period. So we don't have money. Slaves will be an issue, right? The British will appeal to slaves. Join our cause, you will be free. And lots of them will do that. It is a fundamental strategic mistake that the British make in the South because the South has more Tories than any place at all. And had the British not done that, had they not put those slaves in play, meaning that they offered those as some kind of incentive, again, things might have been very different. Might not have had the support of the southern colonies if the British had not put those slaves in play. American Indians will also side with Britain. And again, that's because of the way the colonists reacted after the French and Indian War. Britain possessed a 50,000-man professional army, and then they're going to hire 30,000 Hessians as mercenaries. And again, the hiring of mercenaries also sends colonists over the edge. You are hiring mercenaries to attack your own people, right? Because we're still British. Weaknesses, distance, right? That's going to be a problem. The distance that those men have to come a month on a ship, getting their sea legs, getting back into fighting condition. It is also difficult for communication to travel. We're not getting quick communication from Parliament. America is huge, large, giant for them to try and wage war across all 13 colonies. Across all 13 colonies, we have different topography, meaning we have to fight in a different way on each part of that. British generals in America were poor leaders. So this, again, will show up the idea of having generals who move through the ranks and serve with people as they did in the colonial militia versus commissions that were bought and paid for by wealthy parents for their sons to have, not necessarily based on their ability to lead. America only had to tie. That's really important. We don't have to win. We just have to tie. The British have to win. We just have to get to a stalemate, which is essentially what we really do. We get to just a stalemate where they're done fighting. Like, we don't want to fight anymore. France, B5. The reason we win the American Revolution is France. Full stop, put a period on it, France. No France, no winning. No France, we don't win. Without that. Because not only do they supply money, but they also supply people to help. If you look on page 12, you can automatically see, wow, not a whole lot of strengths, but a whole lot of weaknesses, and a whole lot of weaknesses. Our strengths, outstanding leadership. You can never, ever, ever, ever get away from the idea of outstanding leadership. It is essentially important when you're asking people to go to their death, when you're leading men into a place where they might not survive. Leadership is crucial and key. It is the one component that can overwhelm a superior army. And it is essentially important. We've got them on both sides. We've got George Washington as our military leadership, and we've got Ben Franklin as a diplomat. So we've got two groups of men with strong, outstanding leadership. Ben Franklin is what gets us France. Economic aid from France. Again, France. Defensive military tactics. All we have to do is defend. We do not have to have an offensive strategy. We just need to defend. And again, that's much easier to do. Agriculture, we can feed ourselves. That's going to be a difficult part for the British Army, is feeding itself once they get here. We can feed ourselves simply, easily. We can shoot really well. We're really good at shooting. And then we have this moral advantage that we have been somehow wronged by Parliament. And that, again, is something that will show up time and time again. Weaknesses, badly organized for war. Lacked unity. We don't have unity. Jealousy among colonists. Quarrels and economic difficulties. No money. Soldiers are going to desert because they're not getting paid. They have to go home and help their families. Debtors paid their debts with seriously depreciated money. Military challenges. We don't have firearms and gunpowder. Why? Because we weren't allowed to make it for a long time. Morale in the Revolutionary Army will be undermined by greedy American profiteers. Capitalism. Let's get rich. And only a select minority of Americans truly committed themselves to this cause. All right? Okay, so let me stop this. Damon Fenn, make sure you take your quiz today.